enjoying snacks. I see a lot of chewing mouths. It's always a good sign. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful Saturday to our Saturday school about U.S.'s labor fighting back. Also, this is on the heels of hot labor summer. So 2023, we had a lot of big pushes in the labor movement. We had groups like Starbucks Workers United. We had a lot of just different actions coming from also smaller groups coming together and unionizing their place of work. But then we also just had a lot of national discussion about what the labor movement should look like in the future, how we learn from the past, right? What they've given us, and then what that looks like moving forward. So today we thought we would focus on that since the summer is just getting started. You do see an uptick in labor unions, and then also we have like different conferences coming up during the summer as well to kind of guide us into the next chapter of the labor movement. So, by the way, my name is Ryan. I'm with the Claudia Jones School, and I'm one of the organizers for specifically Saturday School. And today we have with us someone from Detroit, which Bennett will introduce. So thank you everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you again. So this is Cameron Harrison from Detroit. Cameron is the labor education coordinator for the People Before Profits Education Fund.
Can we either use a mic if we have one or speak up?
Oh, okay.
We're not.
Yes, yeah.
So this is Cameron Harrison from Detroit. Need to be in camera.
Yeah.
They are the labor education coordinator for the People Before Profits Education Fund. They are a former grocery store worker and a member of UFCW and shop steward. They write for People's World, which is an online news source, and the former chair of the Detroit Club of the Communist Party of the United States, and currently serves on the National Labor Commission Executive Committee for the Communist Party. So I think we have an icebreaker.
Oh, and before we get started, apologies, the reason we are starting so late. I'm Hannah, by the way, hello. Also on the Claudia Jones School, the organizing committee. We are going to have all of our visuals on my laptop. So if you don't mind just scooting in a little bit, it's gonna be hard to see, but visuals are important. So please bring your chairs, don't be shy. Don't be shy, guys. Just scoot forward, move a chair if there's an empty chair. Yeah, in your way. Just come up closer. I'm gonna, since we weren't able to connect up here.
We'll connect in here.
Yeah, All right, thank you guys so much for moving on. I like that. So it's gonna be a very intimate end to our spring semester of the Saturday School in honor of May Day. So yeah, if anybody has any trouble seeing or wants to word perfect, then or has a question or like wants to see something, just let us know. We're gonna be flexible.
Yes. Do you want to kick off that?
Yes, all right, so our icebreaker, it's very important to us. Oh, before we do that, let's do our house rules and check-in about norms. We're listening to comprehend. The big thing that we really care about in doing Claudia Jones School is that our conversations are interactive and that we are sharing and like learning from each other in this space. So listening to comprehend, please share the air. If you are somebody who is more talkative and know that about yourself, maybe stepping back and allowing somebody else to share, ask lots of questions, respond in good faith, and then 90-second time limit for responses. So we would trying to keep our comments short and concise so that we can hear from everybody and through. All right, so our starting icebreaker is what brings you here. So so turn to somebody that you have not met before or haven't spoken to in a while and introduce yourselves. Talk a little bit about what interests you specifically in the conversation around labor. What do you bring and where does your interest lie? Yeah.
Yeah, we could look it on camera. All right.
We'll start out.
Obviously, it's fine. I think some presenters
And.
You can just allow comments to be their comments, you don't always have to respond. So,
I also know that.
Do you want somewhere? No, somewhere to speak to.
I words are.
Sometimes it's hard to pull.
They really-
But at work, for me, like sometimes hard to hold on my.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, rather than-
oh,
Very-
no.
Oh, also
Starbucks, whatever. So.
Well, we can just, like,
Yeah. Yeah. None of them.
So I'm interested in, particularly in labor. Organized labor has a key role in, so.
Yeah.
Like, later. So sorry.
Yeah.
That's literally. You know, Australia, the sun's going. I was like, what's up, DP, let's get it.
I love it. On your way to like the train. No, I love it. No, it was actually good. I wanted to give you feedback to do it, but honestly, we just did not love it. Like the last time was that like it was like. It's practice. Not growth mindset. Yes. Be growth mindset.
Yeah. That's what I'm interested, I'm very excited by UAW, but I want to.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my professors, my boss, actually. Just red man.
Yeah, no, I mean.
He was, part of the stuff.
Oh, I know.
No, I agree. I do apologize. It's not like the experience that like, planning on it, but because in like a few hours, we have to like get home like pushed. But that does not mean we should not go out. So we'll try to do like we're gonna vote.
I want to see.
Yeah, no, that's huge. The job.
Treat everybody, take a minute, wrap up your conversations that you just had. We wanna do a share back or, yeah. Great.
Oh, yeah, let me give you a call.
I know, on response. If you can hear me, clap once. We're both team. If you can hear me, clap twice. Thank you.
Okay, so would anybody like to share, from their conversation, does anybody have any background in the labor movement or, thing or experiences that they feel are valuable and would bring to this space?
Carol.
I thought we were supposed to talk, like other people talk. So, should I be talking about my own experiences or my partner's?
Yeah,
experience?
whatever came up that you think
Whatever.
would be interesting to share.
Okay, well, Bennett, I didn't know, I know Bennett, but I didn't know that but they were working, at the Fairfax County Library for several years, and they're in the process of organizing, but neither, union that's vying for them has the sufficient numbers for, an election.
Nice.
But, and also they're part-time, which presents problems in terms of the way unions bargain for part-time workers, which is an issue. So, but hopefully, they'll be represented soon and can mobilize workers.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Would anybody else care to share before we move on to the first problem? Good. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, I shared with the folks that I'm currently undergoing a contract writing like at my work with accent to the statement like negotiate a contract. Not part of the negotiation committee, but it's something that we currently undergo.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, going back and forth. The a very complicated process on these things. So I would like to just as an answer.
How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling really good. I feel like we are envisioning it's like our dream world in this space and trying to negotiate the best that we can get for ourselves. It's whatever the outcome will be. You know, so in maybe 5, but no, that we might not reach on the song.
Yeah.
Yeah, congrats on making it to that point.
Sean Fain, the president of the UAW, said, if you get everything you asked for, you didn't ask for enough. So that's a good point. So basically, we want to start with like, what do you all think led us to this moment where, you know, major trade unions are in motion? We have spontaneous organizing drives at more smaller scale. So what y'all think? And I'll tell you kind of what I think. Open it up like that.
I think that the COVID pandemic was probably the biggest driver. I think that people were in a moment of crisis and in a moment of need and realized, wait, my employer in my industry is not there for me in any way, and I have no social safety net. Something has to be done about this. Why am I on the front lines as a as a barista? Why am I on the front lines of this being an essential worker? And like, I don't want to be here. I had a lot of friends who worked at Starbucks who were like, why are we still working here? Like, why are we not locked down? Why do we have to be on these front lines? And this is not we don't feel that this is an essential service. And I think that with Starbucks being like kind of, I think probably the first like big union push.
Yeah.
You know, in the wake of the pandemic, I think that is a really good illustration of kind of the scenario that pushed people to start a union. It's like, wait a minute. These benefits mean nothing, like the meager benefits we have mean nothing when there's a moment of need for them.
Sort of jumping off that, I've done like some interviews and research on labor, particularly like Starbucks. I've interviewed a handful of Starbucks workers for like around like pandemic 2021, 2022 times. It was hell, from what I've heard, because there was less staff, but more people were ordering because they were online. And, you know, it was also in the midst of a union push in which Starbucks was retaliating very heavily. And I heard one story about like removing floor mats because you guys wanted to form a union. Even when they got a union, Starbucks lawyers were very aggressive in delaying its implementation.
Yeah.
I heard a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I would add just kind of a little bit of a follow-up question. I remember often, and it's still in the media, that was, you know, basically explaining the fact that like people were just like quitting their jobs left and right because they would get more money sitting home, right? But we know from the, you know, uptick in people joining unions and trying to organize their workplace, that that's not necessarily true, right? That actually a lot of people were just learning how to possibly make their work conditions better, like what Bennett was saying. So did you all kind of see that kind of shift where if you were maybe in a union prior to the pandemic and then seeing more people join during the pandemic? Or did you, kind of follow that narrative that like people were, you know, basically giving up their jobs to not be less involved, which is kind of like the point of what that narrative was? Yeah, Kara.
I'm not sure whether it's an answer to your question, but I think on a few levels, you know, things have shifted. One, they're more young and what I guess the union movement would consider non-traditional workers that are willing to organize and to risk their jobs. So that's kind of symbolic, I think, of a lot of the baristas and even Amazon workers as well. And more people are in favor of unions than they have been in the past. And I guess if on a, you know, some level, you know, less concerned with name calling or the radicalization of unions and the press. And some unions are just tired of corruption. There's some members, which is an example of UAW. And I mean, that's a remarkable example of the change between, you know, a union that almost the entire top was corrupt. And the membership, you know, went back.
Yeah, they went to prison.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
So,
I'm gonna say one thing and I'll get you on it, but I wanna touch on the pandemic that y'all brought up, because I think that's really important. I think it changed the like mass perceptions in the working class, like, I think we experienced, how do I say, like, just that experience going through COVID, like Ben had said, having to be like, why am I at work right now? I worked at a grocery store. We were like essential workers. People needed food, right? We weren't really, even with a trade union, we were still like heavily exploited, and it was really hard to like go to work, and it was kind of sad, but also at the same time, I think it was good too, because like we were really alienated from each other during COVID. And like the grocery store was a way for you to like interact with people, and also too, like, because of COVID, I feel like it put the spotlight on, you know, service workers and, you know, grocery, retail, nurses, domestic workers. We were formerly like, you know, we were just like service workers or whatever, but then the social importance of like that type of labor was like really elevated, and that's how we got the essential worker thing. And then at the same time, the irrelevant contributions of like the corporate class, the financial class, monopoly capital, whatever we're gonna call it, were like really public. So it's just like, why are you getting paid so much when you ain't really doing nothing at all? Like, these people are working, these people are struggling, these people are having our economy function. You're sitting here just getting fat checks, and I think that kind of brought out like a new class consciousness amongst like masses of people. So that's why I want to add. Ben, what were you gonna say?
I guess I kind of just like a little bit of pushback on the idea of spontaneity in a way, because I feel like as a historian, there's always the idea that like, oh, well, these things just emerged out of nowhere, whereas like in the historical perspective, it's like, well, actually, there's a lot of continuity between things. When you're talking about things like the Amazon labor union, you have the Communist Party, well, and that's not a spontaneous thing. Those are people who are being sent into these workplaces to organize them, who like have the backing of a very old organization. And I think that while there is like new elements and there is some kind of like newness to it, I also think that it provides us an interesting way to look at continuity, because there were longtime labor leaders who were organizing salts for the first Starbucks union. There was an active push by people in the labor movement to do that. That wasn't a unified thing. Some people in the labor movement were kind of antagonistic to the idea of service workers in that sense. But I think that the continuity is much more interesting and much more productive than spontaneity than looking at it through those lenses. I think that it's interesting to see how we can use those layers, use those kinds of connections between traditional labor, the new labor movement, to look at like, well, what's new, what's actually not new, what are we learning here that can help us continue to push this.
That's a good point. Even like what people would call like spontaneous, you know, direct action, like in the South at like Waffle House. It wasn't, they just got there and were just like, you know what, fuck it, I quit. They like organized to some degree, right? They like texted, they're like, hey, let's like do something about this. So I don't know, is that kind of like pushing back on spontaneity too in that way? Does that make sense? Yeah. What else do you want to talk about? Let's get some facts going. Facts are good. So last year, around 500,000 workers walked off the job, and major strikes increased by 280%, which is crazy. It's a big number. The number of workers since 2021 who went on strike quadrupled. And, you know, like Ryan was saying, there were big national strikes, but there were also like smaller strikes. The whole labor movement was in motion, which is really significant. And something else that's interesting is 75% of all the strike activity was in the private sector. and half of that was in healthcare. So, going back to the pandemic, the COVID thing, there was the Kaiser strike in West. That was a 3-day strike. I think it was the largest healthcare strike in US history, so that was pretty significant. Obviously, there was the UAW stand-up strike. The first time that the UAW struck against the big three in the history of the union at the same time. Carol was saying, the UAW under the administrative caucus before, UAW, Sean Fain got into leadership. They had kind of sellout contracts. They weren't very militant. I remember the GM strike in Detroit in 2019. It was like, people were really excited about it, and then the contract ended up not being so great, and it led to demoralization. But with the stand-up strike, I think obviously it brought gains to the auto workers that are union, but at the same time, we see non-union plants elevating their working conditions to try to be like, oh, we don't want the UAW here. But in the South, then Chattanooga, they just won. Next week, they're gonna be voting in Alabama at Mercedes. In Tennessee, at Chattanooga, that was Volkswagen. So that's really significant. You had the Republican governors of the South create this weird billionaire coalition, which is really racist too, because they're like, oh, the UAW is gonna threaten our Southern way of life, which is everybody knows what they mean by that. So I think the UAW, obviously from Detroit, we love the UAW. Everybody has at least a connection to the UAW or one removed connection to the UAW. So that was really important, because at the same time in Detroit, we had the UAW. We also had Blue Cross Blue Shield also represent the UAW on strike. We had a coalition of hotel and casino workers, which was 5 different unions on strike. And then we also had the Teamsters on strike. So we became known as Strike City, because literally you walk, there's a strike, picket. And it was a really interesting and cool time to be in the labor movement, especially in Detroit.
Ooh, we got them mic'd up now, so do we want to do a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna move to our first official breakout group. So again, just to reemphasize the importance of having the Saturday schools actually be fruitful, is because there's already knowledge in the audience, as well as having someone that's involved in the union organizing space, as well as people in the audience as well. So the question that we want to ask to everyone, and we'll just kind of break out in similar groups to last time, but I'll come around and make sure that they're somewhat even. So how can these new developments that were just talked about a little bit build? Oh, I'm sorry, did I skip a question?
We can do either question.
Yeah, you don't want.
How can we do that? Let's do the new developments one first.
Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, so how can these new developments build broader coalitions?
So what are some new or creative strategies? That's the first one.
Yeah, so what are some new or creative strategies and tactics being used in today's labor movement? And also keep in mind that we did just talk about that there's a lot of continuity between what history and labor has shown us. But please feel free to talk about anything that you've seen. Maybe you are personally in a union, or you personally know someone that has organized, or you've interviewed people in the labor movement. So what we'll do is break it out into about groups of 3 or 4, no more of that, so that everybody can get a chance to share out what you've learned, and then we'll do a short share out session after that. Okay. So what we can do is the 3 folks in the back, you can be one group, and then we'll also do maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 over here. And then we'll do 1, 2, 3. Mike, sure, to pop in, sure. 3, and then we'll do Billy if you'd like to be in this group of 3 as well.
And also, I'm gonna come around with my little DIY sign-in sheet. So if you are new or have never come to a Clyde Event School before, you can sign no if we're doing future events. All right.
Let's do 6 or 7.
Yeah, maybe Carol, you join, maybe join back, so that's 4.
Want me to go?
So yeah, we've got 4.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's a 3 or 4.
Oh,
It's
okay.
fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we know, yeah.
I've never been in the union. I wanted to organize, I was on the health faculty. I wanted to get collective bargaining, but it never happened. Tried, different approaches, so, but it's been retarded quite well. My dad was self-employed, and the diamond exchange, going to that, diamond exchange drugs. And when he retired, he worked for Nassau County, where he represented the workers, 1199. So this is in the 70s. And he finally was, that's the first time he was in the union, and he was really, he embarrassed my uncle and all, yelling at my uncle. Anyway, I mean, I have in my background, being a red diamond baby. You know what that means? My parents were sons. So I was exposed for, so, as I told Gabriel, did I get that? I'm most interested in the role of labor as being the leading force in just transition on the threat of dangerous climate change. That's my neighborhood, my, my research graduate. But as far as to answer your question, I want to hear ideas, I don't know. So that's all I'm gonna say.
I mean, yeah, I've never been, being. I've tried to. I interviewed somebody who worked dining hall at my university.
Yeah, you started us off, we don't need.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That'll be my.
Okay.
But I've been to a lot of different, like, I've been like, stuff, especially back in Texas. And like, nonprofits are trying to find places to unionize, a lot of them like small, I think that's something like, kind of the death of like grassroots movement back in the conservative revolution Reagan era, I think a lot of them like proliferated because we nonprofits. It's interesting to see that we do have so many of these like issue-based grassroots type organizations that are kind of nonprofits that are that's its own industry, complex kind of thing. So it's nice to see some like activity like that within those spaces. That's really cool. I think another thing I've noticed is just being the camera stuff,
Yeah.
digital media is a strategy that like a lot of.
I know, I was like, okay, I was like,
That's
no,
it.
it's fine.
Probably organization drive, United, they're heavy on. So that's one not big that I experienced. I know there's a lot of great issues right now. Putting young people in the power. It's hard.
Yeah, that's where they brought him down in March and I was like, oh, yeah.
That I've seen, just trying to take off.
Drop them off without there.
See, more emphasis on 9 to 5 in organizing, which, was just that.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I remember reading,
They had like.
maybe sometimes, that's a class.
Never,
Written
like
by
they never.
thanks to
Like they just.
United Electrical
For
Work.
hours and hours and then we all just decided as a party.
And emphasize,
Yeah.
have that approach.
Things are these all different. Sites.
All right, I'm not sure, I think it's game members. Reading in the last. I'm not sure about that. I think that's really
Yeah.
which is very.
I think that's kind of like you know, people, they're exposed to these things on a level that's like impersonal, that's all, whatever.
That's really. That's what I meant. I would say that's exactly. I don't really like that, because I think that's actually very helpful. And especially, like, what about this idea? Not just like her, it's why they say.
In terms of supporting the students prior.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like within what bounds, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, like.
Let's say. Young people have been, you know, let's say.
Love that, right?
Not gonna get still.
Yeah.
That they started to see connections. I think it's very important. But having more internationalism, you know, I think that will sort of like, connecting the dots, you know, of the struggles. I think it's very important. The whole picture. That's why
Well.
Yeah. It's taking advantage. But now I'm seeing it. A lot of that too. Yeah. We're more conservative. Someone definitely will just keep them, you know,
There's a lot of.
like we could.
Let me ask you a question, George Mason, was there any, student activity around Dawson?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
SCP.
Yeah, so,
SCP has been really active.
okay.
Although as like I don't know, you can know. So that's.
But they've tried to knock down on it, so. I think by the end of the past few years. Like, they can't do, they can't.
Yeah. I just might.
Oh,
It's not like this.
Okay, I was like.
I thought like you just they already.
Right, I appreciate that.
All right, let's wrap up our conversations. Make your final points.
You can hear me, clap your hand.
Just one hand.
Just one hand.
One hand, clap your one hand.
All right, so we would love to hear back from each group and, we would like to hear, like, somebody who has not shared yet within your group. We would like to encourage you to share and report back. If you don't feel comfortable, obviously that's fine, but we want to hear some new voices, as many people as we can. Let's start over here. Does anybody want to share?
We were saying with the tactics, was using social media and also having independent, like, political resolutions or actions that they wanted to take, which has been a difference since like Reagan and the Clinton era. Shake back on that, so nice round for sure.
Awesome. So we got social media, but also different resolutions within the unions or organizing space. Good. Okay. Would anybody like to add to that? Going to the group in the back?
Hi,
Hello.
this is Natasha. We talked about reaching back to history, not being afraid of anti-communist ideas and feeling confident in each other, but also recognizing how the community can bring in specific types of knowledge and trying to build that from the bottom up rather than from the top down.
Ooh,
Fine, still fine.
okay. Thank you. All right.
folks back here.
Yeah, we talked a lot about just like our individual kind of experiences with unionization over the past few years, like pandemic and then throughout the pandemic. I think one interesting thing was kind of the difficulty that some of us found with like trust and relationship building, when like working remote, because we mostly would work like remote or white collar, or hybrid jobs, and so that's just like kind of a shift. What else?
We spent a lot of time talking about that, which is like the opposite of the question, it's like a unique challenge, but like. The ones that require creative solutions.
Yeah, no, he totally has the answers, so it's fine. We're gonna help you. Thank you, though. That's actually really important. I think trust is actually a really big thing, especially in like more quote unquote, yeah, white collar jobs, right? Because if you're like looking at faceless screens all day, those aren't exactly the places where you maybe expect to unionize or have those conversations. Cause you kind of need to have like nuance and, you know, personality to it, so.
And like that there's just more, like, you can't have conversations really that aren't available by your workplace unless you like go out of your way to form that connection, be like, hey, give me your number, or else you're in Slack or you're in Teams or we're on Zoom even, and it's like, that's all. So
Yes.
a very different things.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, and last group up here.
So we talked a bit about the push to include like youth and rank and files in these union movements, and in contrast, like a top-down approach. You know, we have in Texas like the YALT, which is the youth active labor leaders movement, and that's like popping up in other places around the country. And then we talked a little bit about how digital media plays into that, into unionizing now, especially with like Starbucks Workers United and et cetera, and how that also kind of reflects in like favorability polls among unions and like the country now. And so, yeah, am I missing anything? We got pretty much got that. Okay. Yeah.
Some.
Should I start off the bomb?
Yeah.
All right. Something that's not new historically, but it's becoming new in that, it's finally gonna maybe happen, and it's the idea of a general strike. So UAW, Sean Fain, after the stand-up strike, called on all trade unions in the country to align their contracts to expire on April 30th, 2028, to set in motion the actual process for a general strike. And I know there's a lot of strong opinions about the general strike. People have been saying we need a general strike forever. But I'm gonna say some Sean Fain quotes about UAW's process about achieving this and why it's important. Then maybe we can kind of hash it out and have a discussion about it. So he said, the first is that to reshape the economy into one that works for the benefit of everyone, working class people and not just the wealthy, we need to reclaim our country's history of militant trade unionism that united workers across race, gender, and nationality. A general strike isn't going to happen on a whim. It's not going to happen on social media. It's not going to happen just by saying it. A successful general strike is going to take time, mass coordination, and a whole lot of work by the labor movement. So with that, Ryan?
Yeah, so within the confines of those quotes, because we don't want this conversation to just be about every downside or every positive about what a general strike could mean, but more so, what do you think that this, how could this actually come into play with what Sean Fain is basically saying about these things, right? That it's going to take long-term strategy. I mean, the projected date is by 2028, right? So within those confines, let's talk about if you have any opinions that maybe from your own experience within your union, seeing things like, yeah, Starbucks United basically choosing one day, right, like Red Cup Day, where they're taking something and making it national so that Starbucks is taking a hit all over, right? And it's becoming not only on social media, but people are actually showing up in person, not purchasing something, but still tipping their bartenders, right? And then going out in front picketing, which is actually a lot more powerful than just maybe it happening in pockets and it's spreading across the country, right? So that'd be something similar to what we're talking about here. So would anybody care to share?
Yeah, plenary. And I just want to add to, like, it's not just UAW now. Unite here out in California has already aligned their contracts for April 30th, 2028. So we're getting a little closer, but we need like a lot of work. We need a lot of work, a lot of organization, and we need also a mass movement that unites labor, the neighborhoods, community, the oppressed, everything for a successful strike. So, plenary open. Carol.
Well, one aspect that's very basic is having a larger percentage of the workforce being unionized. The percentage in this country is really pathetic. And if we're really talking, you know, labor led, at least in part, then you really have to have larger percentage of workers that understand the importance of working class issues.
We'll go Ben and then Aaron. Thank you.
As somebody who's organized in like white collar spaces, I was basically telling this person over here, like middle-aged, like liberals are like some of the biggest obstacles, like using words like militant. Like when sending people into a frenzy, like, you know, like just using any language to try to convince them that serious militant, like left-wing trade unionism is good and you know, provides results is met with like serious hostility and very concrete attempts to just smash any of that conversation, let alone give you, you know, like I'm basically like, I'm not allowed to talk to my union members, because I'm militant and I openly call myself a communist. And it's not received well by the leadership of my union.
I was just gonna say, like, I think you have to think about like the terrain from which we're struggling for a really long time. There's been very like few pieces of like legislation that have actually like afforded workers the rights to be able to unionize and the rights to be able to, you know, have those like union negotiating contracts like actually recognized by a governing body like the National Labor Relations Board. And we haven't really seen any changes in that respect, honestly, since the Biden NLRB, which, like it or not, has been one of the most pro-worker NLRBs that we've ever seen in like past few decades. So I think another thing that we have to think about too when we're talking about like how we can actually like create conditions that make it naturally possible is like what are the like political and like legal terrains on like power structures.
Good point.
Joshua.
Is there anything actually going on with the NLRB or like what is there are there changes being made or
Yes.
like are there advocates?
GOP just tried to push a bill, like pretty much nullify a lot of their abilities to like help workers protect them from union busting in the workplace. And the Biden administration vetoed it. Just great, but like, you know, for the Trump presidency, you can see that. Right? So there are like the NLRB is actively gaining power to help union movements and the Biden administration protected them. You know, they're
But what about reform of the NLRB itself? Is that something that?
Well, the PRO Act would give tooth behind the NLRB. There'd be actual real penalties for union busting. Not just like a couple $1,000s, but like legitimate. Like it created a condition where companies like Amazon and Starbucks, for instance, would kind of slow down on the rampant, obvious union busting tactics. So I would say that while we don't have the PRO Act, that is something that could, I guess, reform it in a way to give it some teeth, if that's helpful.
So are unions actively advocating for the PRO Act?
Yes.
Are they mobilizing their members?
Yes.
To get?
Yeah, it's labor's #1 legislative priority.
Yeah, so like, you throw that.
The obstacles, I mean, the most obvious one is the Republicans, but not gonna say that the Democrats aren't obstacles either. I know there was Manchin and Cinema, that was an obstacle to getting the PRO Act through. But yeah, I mean, it's really the Republicans, especially like, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Project 2025. But the idea is to like destroy the so-called like administrative state, and part of that is the NLRB. And essentially turning the NLRB from like a pro-worker body to like basically a pro-boss company union type body, like totally destroy it. And bring it under the, not even make it independent no more, not that it's independent, but like just pretty much make it a wing of like fascism. So, yeah, scary times.
Well, you're raising the issue, I think the issue of the November elections. How do we prepare for that? And how does the union's going to prepare for that? I think, Sean Fain, I think, I think it was very important that he led the UAW to support a ceasefire, but at the same time has endorsed Biden. And what's going to happen after the election? If Trump and the Republicans are defeated, then obviously we have big challenges ahead, and I think your leadership knows that, and AOC knows that. She was interviewed, and she was asked a question, how do you talk to Arab Palestinian Americans, let's say in Michigan, who've lost their family in Gaza? Well, she said, I'm not going to lecture to them, but what I'm saying is that we be in a better position to organize for change with the defeat of the Trump and the Republicans. But what happens if the Trump wins the election? Will a general strike happen before 2028, perhaps? I mean, how are we going to organize for just transition, which I think is, for my particular interest is climate change. And Matt Hooper wrote a book, Climate Change as Class War, pointing to the fact that the working class and organized labor has to take the lead, not only in the United States, but globally, to have any chance of, preventing much worse consequences. So I think that's, my question is, what is the UAW and the folks thinking about that immediate future?
Hard question to answer, to be honest. Well, I will say that while you're right, the UAW has come out for a ceasefire. The AFL-CIO has come out for a ceasefire, but at the same time, they endorsed the Biden-Harris ticket like earlier than they've ever endorsed in the past. So there's different perspectives, whether it's like they understand the clear threat on the one hand, and they're taking like a strictly anti-fascist position early on. On the other hand, it's just like they're kind of putting their cards out on the table too early without getting more concessions from the Democrats, right? So there's two perspectives. Me personally, I don't really know, to be honest. And I also not really sure about like what is to be done if Trump wins.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question. I'm sorry I don't have the answer.
No, I think,
Hopefully other people.
I posed it to the whole group.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like an interesting thing to pose because like both can be true at the same time. Like, I don't think because they called for a ceasefire, that inherently means that they disagree with the ever rising like fascism within our own country. I don't think that, those two things can be true at the same time. But it also does actually bring us to like the next part that we were going to talk about anyway, which is like building the broad left through labor, right? Like through the labor movement, like it is connected to everything, as you were just saying. And to Carol's point, like bringing more people into the labor movement because we are all actually working class people, instead of just agreeing on like one issue, is actually the ways in which we will not have to choose between what we are given right now, right? Those are the ways in which a general strike could actually become real because everybody is still understanding that whether or not they, the person that they, vote into office actually gets into office lawfully or not. The point is that you still have an organizing base that is growing because of the fact that we recognize that, yeah, people that were put on the back burner for years and years are now like essential to our society, right? Like all of a sudden they've been given these titles. That means they should also be given the respect due and be given the privileges to organize and, come to those agreements within, their own, within their own jobs. So that, if you want to move on to the next point that we're going to.
And I just wanna say too, the Democratic Party is not gonna save nobody, like straight up, but that doesn't mean that a labor-led People's Front, led by the organized working class, led by the faith groups, the civil rights groups, united in struggle, can't be the main force that drives progressive change. I think that we, in America, we're taught to think of like liberal, conservative, blah, 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 but it's really a class question. The working class and the ruling class, or the capitalist class, or the corporate class, whatever we want to call them. So it's, trying to unite our class and move as a class. And then with that, there's an emergence of a broad left in labor that's kind of been brewing for a long time. But they're fighting from bottom up, rank and file movements for whether it's in the political realm for pro-labor policies, whether it's, political action to combat rising fascism, or it's building up bargaining for the common good type formations where you link labor with community groups, the SEIU is bargaining for tenants unions, the Chicago Teachers Union led a really big kind of community-led effort to fight for smaller class sizes. They linked up with non-teachers, they fought for housing for the homeless, and that's really a significant development. It's kind of what the party calls the All People's Front in action. It's not all the people yet, but it's emerging in that way. And some other points too. In Maine, our comrades in Maine are working on a coalition that's labor-led with the environmental justice groups, and they're fighting for like you are interested in a just transition based on good union jobs. And they actually had some people of the state AFL-CIO and the labor federations come, and they're like, these communists are pretty cool, actually. I'm gonna put my lot in with them. And that's the example of like what the Communist Party can provide in the struggle for peace, democracy, and justice and stuff.
Nice. I think that
I also think that on this question of a general strike, I think it also requires a reorientation of that, like the radical left, thinking about how there's always been this idea that like, we have to be independent, we have to be independent, we have to do these things like outside of the two-party system, which, I agree with. I think working class independence is important. But I think that the problem has been that people are under the impression that we can just kind of declare independence without the conditions existing for independence to actually materialize. And so I think that in approaching this situation as the left, we have to reorient ourselves and understand that like the split from like the Democratic Party of like progressive and labor forces is not, it's not going to come from us saying that like, oh, we're going to put socialism on the ballot. Like that's kind of a preposterous like strategy and orientation. Like it requires us being able to work within these existing movements of the unions of the labor struggle, but we have to do it in a strategic way where we're not moving before the movement can actually happen. And I think that is something that is required of the left to approach the situation. So everybody wants to call like, oh, we need a general strike for this, we need a general strike for this, but nobody's willing to put in the work to actually make those things possible. And those things are not just possible by saying them. And I think that's our main task right now as a left, is to facilitate the splits, the changes, the transformations, the movements that are beginning to come into fruition. We see this in the split between like the base of the Democratic Party and the leadership of the Democratic Party, particularly over, the genocide in Gaza. Like, I think that is a key a key kind of illustration that there is a huge difference between the majority of Democratic voters, 80% of them at least, supporting an immediate ceasefire and to US weapons sales to Israel. Whereas you have the Democratic Party that does not reflect that statistic. But we can't just tell these people we're independent. People are not convinced, and so it's our job not to tell people this is what we have to do. Our job is to facilitate their own consciousness about why we need to split, about why we need independence. And we can't do that before these people can actually win something. You know, you can't start a battle that you can't win. That is suicide. Particularly because then you're gonna have the most reactionary elements of the Democratic Party in total control and in total possession of all of the party's resources. So I think that this issue of the general strike is an illustration that we on the left need to also reorient our strategy to labor, to the unions, to the base of the, you know, progressive working class. We need to be prepared to play the long game in a way that we have not for many years now. I think that that's particularly evident with the electoral strategy that I've seen from a lot of left organizations. You know, why are we spending millions of dollars maybe on candidacies and elections that we can't actually win, as opposed to reorienting that struggle to the local level where there's possible victories to be had. But it requires us working within those conditions of tension. I think that requires us to be a little bit more flexible in our tactics than we have been in the past few decades.
Aaron, was your hand up?
Yeah, it was, so I wanted to really go over a lot of things that have been exciting in the conversation. Because then I really like your point where you're talking about how like the problem isn't like whether or not we should be like entering into alliances with people who we know are probably not the most reliable people, but more so like how do we maintain our independence like while participating in these coalitions? Because it's not like, oh, we're in coalition with someone. That means that we have to give up any initiative, any independence on our end. That's not how coalitions work. In any coalition, there's a contradiction between like unity and struggle. Always unity and struggle. So struggle without unity, so unity without struggle. So when we're thinking about like electoral strategy and thinking about this movement that's kind of erupting around Palestine and like the fight for ceasefire, I think we as like, you know, people of a more progressive minded consciousness have to do a better job of like linking the fight like for a ceasefire with the fight against mafia. Because there are a lot of people, like that it said, who are justifiably outraged by what's going on. And many of these people also do not want fascists to win the next election. Right. But we're not going to be able to mobilize those people. We're not going to be able to build the kinds of alliances that we need to build if we're, you know, approaching them in this very like condescending way. That's like, oh, you kind of just have to like follow the line. Right. And I think the strategy, honestly, that we've been seeing from like some unions, specifically like the coalition of like Black trade unionists, kind of shows that there are more and more people who are realizing that we have to learn how to do two things at the same time. Yeah. Because we can't, you know, go into a knife fight against fascists like with one hand. Yeah. We have to be willing to use every tool in our arsenal because they're definitely good at that.
Yeah. Yeah, Natasha, and then we're actually gonna go into our, one of our final breakout groups, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that like, one thing that I've noticed a lot in community organization world, is that they really focus on small wins, and that really helps to get people who have never engaged in these types of fights to continue coming back because they feel like there's something going on, right? I feel like a lot of working class people, especially I work with immigrants, you hear people saying things like, yeah, social justice, etc., but like there is no like actual material change, right, in what they're seeing. People are coming door knocking, telling them, join our movement, we'll get you freedom. But what does that freedom mean? What does it look like? And what steps are we taking to get there? Like we need those concrete, actionable steps to be able to get there. And we need to take those baby steps together. Yes, with the working class, rather than just like expect things to happen. Yes.
I just have like a quote from a trade union leader that I think is pretty interesting. she said regarding the 2024 elections, we either have an opportunity for a third reconstruction or we have an opportunity for the return of the Confederacy. And I think that kind of puts it starkly, at least from the trade union perspective, about the importance of the elections coming up. So you want to lead into the final thing?
Yeah, so thank you for participating in this discussion, and obviously it's ongoing, but what was touched on in a few of the comments was that basically building those broader coalitions would be what we use to advance class consciousness, right? And to your point about making sure you have those small wins, like that is the point of getting people to see themselves in each other instead of looking to the, you know, to the 1% or the managerial class, or that's not a class, but you know what I mean? Instead of looking to those people to be like the HR to our problems, right? So with that in mind, though, what we want to do for the last breakout group is talk about the question of how can we leverage union organizing to make an impact on an international level? So one thing that has obviously been brought up multiple times is calling for a ceasefire. A few groups have done it, but does this, you know, conflict with their other views? Or can we use these to continue to build that leverage, right? And continue to build that power. So if you would like, you can break out into the same groups, or I would love to see some people maybe form new groups. So I'll just read off or do numbers 1 to 4, and then we'll just like break out in groups because we do have a little bit of time for this question, and then we'll bring it back to wrap it up. Okay, so we'll start from here. So hello, you'll be number 1, David 2, 3, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4,
7.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 if you would like to. Okay, all right, so we'll do 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Thank y'all, and be sure to finish the snacks as well. Yeah, have a good one.
Where to? What number? Oh, where's 2?
1s to the front, 2s.
2 back here?
I'm reading my.
This is 2?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
David.
good. Oh, I'm so.
Oh.
Oh, you wait, you could have been there. You're right. Right?
I think I was a 4.
How can we leverage union organizing to make an impact on the international? Oh, I love your studio. I was like, oh my god.
No, I got them in Boston. They were,
Oh my god.
Oh, wow.
But I mean.
Yeah.
That's not. Honestly, yeah, I think the labor movement. Not necessarily.
I guess the one example I was thinking of is there's a lot of like trade delays that were blocking away that spin or that since this one that just happened. And I feel like it's that's been Vietnam did it as well, and I think that the people things for people to do it like well the needs that you're talking about people divesting from weapons. It's like looking at the overlap between their industry and just generally. That's a way to kind of divert their population is like steel, imperialism, all of those things. So I think that is an area where it like
Get on.
the limitation of the like experience. But I think that they have it's like, well, if you actually like if these are the candidates more separate, like there's an the opportunity to ask outside administration, having an economic divestment of our union. In this or in this and like mobilizing it together of that kind of divestment. And I think that is very I think that is times to build because
But-
that would be, it's not time to wait around, so. Be a step.
Okay.
No, I mean, speaking strategically, there's a
Like,
ultra left, no strategy,
It's good, yeah.
no strategy. It's just rhetoric, you know, and that's why I don't like it.
Yeah, I feel like we're
I
inspired.
had a
We don't think that kind of
And I rejoined.
investment.
That's
I think the
Well,
Claudia Jones.
The question is, how the US labor movement can, be more effective internationally, that's.
Like this would.
Like also at my job, really.
This mic is missing.
Like in Philly, I don't think it wasn't precise, but
Also.
basically just based on like what they see, or like what issues they are running and what in their own, and I think and applying it to like the broader side. Similar like what we applied to like right,
Oh, that was awesome.
we applied it to our party, like
So I'm thinking.
but it is broader, like there, right? So yeah, I think honestly.
No, our.
And-
It's really.
You're definitely-
And we have like, strong.
I don't know why.
Well,
Okay, that's what you did say, okay, all right.
The American who like sacrifices.
Can I send this to myself?
I don't you don't have a sponsor. By how you can sacrifice aside.
Oh, I feel like when did you found it?
You just brought up an issue that I'm very concerned about, extract
Yeah, thank you.
You said, you know,
I was talking.
yeah, so the union companies are gonna select
Like, I wonder if
Definitely
We have balance, like.
because where I come from, Guatemala, there's a super nationwide strike last year when there was
So, I think there are
really
solutions.
but because they're
To,
very
okay, we got two,
themselves like very.
we got two
System of.
capitals that are driving extraction. Fossil capital, which would lead us to, you know, climate health.
But also.
And where the Republican Party is just this, Trump Republican Party is just any real concrete, example of instruments of fossil capital, that's that. I mean, Trump just invited
But you know that they.
these, oil executives to his resort. He said, give me $1 billion for my campaign, I bet you some of them will give me money. And Jill may be drilled. This is the, you know, this is the big challenge we face in this election. Now, the Democratic Party is a mix, right? And they have, they're promoting, you know, green transition and they keep on investing in fossil fuels at the same time. So, but the green capital is the other, right, green capital is also, it's an ally to the fossil capital, but it's also an opponent with extraction. So that's where strategy comes in, so important to me. You know, that you pointed out and
It's like, it might not be
benefit,
as happening today.
because
Right,
you
like
got
that's
both
kind of.
battles at the same time.
Like, why is it,
So,
and there's why don't they care about
really
parents, so everyone's serving all of their life.
Uh, So now when you.
That also actually, everybody showed up as well, right? They kind of say, like, groups, but I don't know, we would like, I was like, I've tested some of those folks, and they
Socialist.
try, it's like, but they,
Of how this could happen, but.
they don't know necessarily for them, but they like, they need to be active to start like this,
Renewable energy,
right?
then you could recycle actual
maybe in
message.
Detroit, maybe we'll.
And by the way, the
But I tried to reach out to them and
what we know
but they,
about the world,
no,
right?
you know, they're still working like full-time
I
hours
would
or
say that
like.
like, we don't need everybody.
And if
And so I don't know.
we
That's
demilitarize,
I think that that's.
Also, they're not like on really grants or like being radicalized, like especially like our college kids. A lot of the students
I think that like that's.
they, all these
Sure.
rebels are right in the infrastructure of the military.
like they're not so like, they're just like.
Instead of lying.
I'd like to see.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I feel like a lot of them like to reach out
There, where when you.
That's what I show. I do hope that.
Really, you're able to stronger.
Like, you
I
know.
think that a lot of
One
people
example
are
would be a
and everybody to be on the same page. So that
I'm just saying,
it's not
aluminum
realistic, nor is it, nor is it the
Oh,
most.
no, but I'm
important
saying.
thing at a particular moment. But
It's an example.
Yeah, I know.
It takes much less energy to recycle aluminum into the mine bauxite
The majority of the
and
country is
extract aluminum.
Yeah.
involved the majority.
So,
of the
and that's even with fossil fuel. We renewable
Back, yeah, it was like maybe.
recycle much more
Really
efficiently.
important
And, I think that's
asset.
the point of some people.
Like they always have to, states particularly.
So, I mean, that, I think has to be part of our, you know, agenda.
People are very militant about
We have
they're
to
really
put
requiring
an agenda, not
like
oversimplify.
radical.
Okay, that's all. I thought you
The
were.
rights.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right now, because I know the fee, like Democrats think it, the ceasefire revolution, like that would be somehow, like revolution. See, it's like a huge leader in the movement right now. A lot of the veterans, like, they're sitting in a house meeting, like,
Oh, you can.
like, arrested. And then how are we, can't be missing this group of people that are religiously motivated in the same kind of ideological direction.
As long as the space is gonna be within the
And we
base,
should
like,
be
yeah.
okay with that being the reality.
But I think that it's pretty recognizable, like, I feel like it stands out.
That's our nation, like, it does start to, like,
Yeah.
direct government results. And I think that that was an asset in some rights. But it happened this like, working basically that they had a base of support that kind of protected some voters against like government. So it has obviously prevented, but how we got even, I think on the same organization, but I think like, I said.
Why did it actually kind of
like that? It means we're in about for the past few decades, been neglected by the left. The whole like popularization of atheism and actually by anti-atheism.
Oh.
It is, it's such a, regardless of your outlook, like it's a vibe killer. What do you think about it?
I'm sorry. The Bitcoin.
Yeah. I literally don't know. I was like, I didn't watch it. I don't know who that was person. I'm not too sure, like, the implications. I'm watching it or not.
Ryan, you take it from here.
I got you. Yeah, not that. Don't know anything about those folks.
For most.
I know this like.
Like, you know.
No, no. I don't have to, they're like, they're working on something like that. Yeah.
And actually, that's what I say, like all Americans will make so.
It's hard for us to organize. I have heard of it. I've never been like. I'm pretty. Yeah.
But I just like, they are always doing.
We'll do a minute. Okay, all right, everyone, have about a minute left to wrap up the discussion. So if someone that hasn't shared out yet would like to go now, go on ahead and then we'll bring it back. So about one more minute.
The ways in which the administrative state
Yeah, but I mean, that's a disaster.
It is, but most of I'm sorry, I'm scared. No, it's just a lot, I think that, but gradually, five is. I can say when I post about like the possibility, very much like all thought out, and that's why.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we do, but you know, well, second, when those are migrating well, there's a data.
Right, yeah,
You know, challenges migrating from us.
Yeah, Ryan,
Yeah, what about?
it's been good.
I don't understand.
Like, I'm getting I need.
How, simply equation, selection. Between
All right.
five and
I think we are good, so wrap up your last comment,
When you see,
and then please.
I don't
Direct the
understand.
focus back up here.
Because they have no strategy and they don't understand.
David, we're coming back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We got excited, we're sorry.
No, that's okay, lively discussion, we love that.
Don't you have to go?
We need to get a group of leftists together, get them all heated.
Well, I mean. Can I go first?
Yes, all right, so as you know, we're gonna, go around, so same as every time. If someone hasn't shared from your group, and feels like maybe sharing something that was specifically relevant or interesting that you may have not heard yet, or if you would just like to share for your group because you want to speak, please go ahead. So we'll start with Aaron in the back group.
Yeah, so I wanted to say like first, like my group was kind of talking about the like tensions. It's like, okay, we definitely, want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of like the US working class, but like at the same time, like how do we also think about the like international context of like everything that's happening?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, what's your name? I'm sorry. How do I pronounce that? Kiburiti. Okay, so Kiburiti brought up the point about like mining in the Congo and how that creates like a conflict too. And David also brought up the point about like the just transition. And so the two of them I thought were bringing up this like sort of like interesting tension between like the US labor movement, which is like doing a good thing by like trying to move in the direction of the just transition. But at the same time, it's like, how do we consider the, international interests of people who aren't the US working class, which is a very real question. I don't think it's particularly useful to think about that in a way that's like, okay, well, the US working class is like useless. Like, that's just not, the reality that we have to live with. Like, we have to find like some type of solution that bridges the two interests and like figures out a way for both to get what they need, which is not an easy thing to do at all. And so I kind of like tried to ask the question of like, would the Green New Deal be like kind of an example of like a way to sort of like bridge those two tensions? Just because it was also brought up in our group that Project 2025 is like a very real threat to people in this country. And it's an example of how incredibly organized that far right is in their plans to use the US like administrative state to accomplish their agenda. And so we kind of had like a brief discussion about that. And then also we're kind of trying to think about like how we'll also kind of thinking about like how it can be hard for like US working class people to be able to like, not go get like a new iPhone or things like that, just because the ruling class like creates like artificial scarcity and like makes it like so difficult for people to like do those things.
Yes.
So a lot of like question goes into each other and discussion.
I just add a very footnote to excellent summary. The Green New Deal came out of AOC and Markey, right? But it was all centered on the US. And so we got to think of a global Green New Deal that addresses the North-South relationship and the exploitative relation of the capitalist countries in the global North, and also extractivism even by China, like in Africa. It's a mixed bag. So thank you. That was a really good discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That was a great start. And we do have a few points that we'll bring up as well, but I want to go to the other groups. So, let's move to the back group, the other back. Somebody like to share out from your group?
Talk about this, long permanent union in the 1960s, against the Department of Israel, in the 45, taking cargo and sending cargo to cargo South Africa. And that was a huge thing that could help with tagging issues and all too. And then, Matt and I just came back from Cuba and how we saw another brigade, a bunch of Amazon labor unionists, and it was, I think, ANP was there, and it was UAW members there too. So we'll see that they were all in solidarity with the blockade.
Right.
Didn't talk too much about what their tactics were. Their stance on there.
Nice. Oh yeah, love that. Thank you. And then we'll just go to this group over here. We have somebody that would like to share out what y'all are talking about. I know we have a newcomer that just came in, so.
Welcome.
Oh, yeah, I can say, I think we mostly spoke about just the role of unions in educating our workforce and.
Yeah.
You know, radicalizing their members and counteracting like kind of, you know, US cultural capitalist hegemony and cultivating that radicalism and that militancy to, you know, be able to recognize the bullshit without somebody having to tell them, you know.
Thank you, appreciate it. Oh, yeah, Karen.
We also talked about, you know, trade policy. And that is a big hurdle to try to educate workers about like why they should not be afraid of Chinese trade unions. You know, the fact that there needs to be a lot of education around that, as well as the whole issue of climate change and that being really a global problem that should bring people together to fight it. And to talk about just transition, as David mentioned before. So stop there.
Thank you, Carol, I appreciate it. All right, and then the front group here, did it, someone else already share? And it's great. No? Would somebody like to?
Nobody else will do it. I'm.
Okay.
We talked about a little bit about the UAW's plan to like divest their industry from like war profiteering and like weapons sales and weapons manufacturers.
Yeah.
And so I think that constitutes like a progressive development that provides kind of the tactical incentive for how unions within like our limited kind of political terrain right now that like unions can have independent action and act independently. For just like international solidarity, and it's been happening in Italy and in the UK, like trade unionists blocking weapons sales to Israel, blocking like occupying the docks and refusing to like again allow like cargo to go to Israel. Right. So I think that those are things that can be replicated in the United States, and I think that the support is currently there. It's about I think in some ways, in some unions, it's kind of the disconnect between the leadership and the base. Which is to be expected. Have this kind of new upsurge of young unionists versus these kinds of larger and longer lasting institutions. Especially in like groups like the AFL-CIO. So I think that those are, you know, that's a concrete way of kind of the ability to move to have effect on policy.
Thank you. Yeah, those were all like really specific kind of nuanced conversations that really go into the larger conversation about what we're talking about as far as like bridging the gap between internationalism. I also think just something that came to mind, I recently went to, there was like the National Cannabis Festival. I didn't go to the festival. I don't need a festival to smoke weed, but I did go to the summit that was that Wednesday before. And it was about like the differences between declassifying versus what's the other word? Moving it down on the tier list versus getting it removed from the tier list. There's two words, and they were using the whole time to talk about like, is it, you know, does it make sense to work towards one if the goal is to get rid of it from, being criminalized at all, right? And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with this, like when we see, different unions like going after the small wins, as we were kind of talking about, doesn't that like also then build more support for the international questions, right? Like, doesn't that then build more worker class solidarity? So then you can start talking about the garment workers that are actually being exploited and you're just selling those products that we're buying from them, right? Like, so I think it all just kind of works hand in hand. But also something that's important to remember is that if you do have some type of divide within your union, or you see that there's issues that you think are much more important, but the leadership isn't really reflecting that, you also like have a responsibility to organize around that and then show that to your leadership and be like, we're organizing so that like our broader union can organize on like bigger issues, right? So it kind of has to like start in these pockets, and then you even have to bring that to the leadership, who oftentimes just acts as another HR, right? Sometimes you have to bring that to them and be like, actually, no, we do want to be a lot more, vocal about these issues. Even if you are going to, support a certain candidate, we still think that these issues internationally are of utmost importance right now, not just looking forward to like the November, election or something like that.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah, please.
Carol, you brought up trade policies, and I was in Chicago meeting with some trade union leaders, Chicago Federation of Labor, and we were talking about NAFTA and the garment industry. And he was saying, after NAFTA, for example, like Workers United, they organized a lot of textile and garment production. Then after NAFTA, all them jobs left, right? They went to find cheaper, more exploitable labor overseas. And one of the main places was Bangladesh. And he was saying, Workers United, they never really gave up the fight of organizing garment workers just because they're not here. Like, it's in their DNA, if you will, to like organize garment workers internationally. And he said something that I thought was like kind of communist. He was just like, well, these capitalists, they're organized internationally, they're transnational, they're international, so labor has to be international. And I thought that was like solid. I was like, yeah, that's honestly it. You're right. And he was saying that like, while what we can do in the States is the commodities, they're made by like heavily super exploited women in Bangladesh, right? And what we can do is the commodities are sold here. So what we can do is we can boycott them, we can picket here. And they had an action in Chicago outside of Levi's where they had like a no justice, no jeans, and the whole campaign, it was Chicago Federation of Labor, the Coalition of Labor Union Women, and Workers United, and there was another one too, but I can't remember. But anyway, their whole thing was no justice, no jeans, and they're picketing and trying to get Levi's to sign on to the International Accord, which is like a kind of like an international regulatory thing of like, I guess, safe and not safe, but like better production, just like kind of in a way putting people before the profits. I mean, it's still a capitalist thing, but the fact that Levi's hasn't even done that is just like making people really mad. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I was invited to, with Carol was there too, a Coalition of Labor Union Women panel discussion with workers and trade unionists from Bangladesh, just detailing how horrible the conditions are and what American trade unions, American workers can do to support them, because like it or not, capital's international. Labor has to think internationally too and work together internationally. So that's I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really important too.
Awesome. Any final comments before we lead into our closing for today? Yeah. Oh, we'll go here and then Natasha. Yeah.
In the right place, it's just a question about how Americans make the sacrifice. I feel like it's gonna take a lot of sacrifice of what you're comfortable with, what you're willing to give up to ensure that others also have a means of life. So whether it's like not having access to like, some electrical equipment, maybe not having access to several cars, to ensure that other folks have future. Because what's happening in the South, which was comfortable in the United States, has meant so many lives being sacrificed. So how much of you also sacrificing them?
Thank you. Yeah, Natasha, did you have?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I wanted to say that often as leftists, we are victims of analysis paralysis, and we don't actually like have the skills, a lot of us, to like do some of this work, and I think like we say, oh, let's organize. What does organizing actually take? You know, do we know how to have those one-on-ones? Do we know how, so I would really like to see a group of people come together and be like, we're gonna teach people how to organize from like a very broad-based way, you know what I mean? And I think that would be really cool to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like y'all know the content that we're gonna talk about, because this is all led perfectly, but that's kind of the point of all these conversations and the Saturday school in general, right? Is like political education can't just be like hearing from very like educated scholars, right? That have been studying this for years and years and years. Like it has to be approachable. It has to be what we actually experience. Like bringing Cameron here and other people like him for the Saturday schools, the point is that these are people that we know and have seen what, you know, what they can do or what they've learned from other people, right? And it's not always, that's not what the labor movement looks like. When we were just kind of having a discussion about the Starbucks Workers United, and like I know Carol was at a lot of the rallies as well as a lot of people. But oftentimes the conversations looked like talking to people that didn't take the traditional route of going to, you know, to get like a formal education. It was people that got jobs out of necessity, like most of working class people, and have now recognized that like, why are you calling me essential when you're not giving me like essential benefits, right? But those are just regular conversations that happen within political education spaces. It doesn't have to take on like a whole leg of its own. It can literally just be within the spaces that you already occupy, right? And that's kind of like what you were alluding to about like, you know, teaching how to salt and like what that looks like, you know, when you get into a workspace that you might be the new person, how can you actually leverage being the new person to like point out some of the flaws that are happening at that, you know, place, right?
Yeah, and I like that you said analysis paralysis. I never heard that before, but that's good because like, we're not trying to be a talk shop, and
Yeah.
to be honest, theory without practice ain't shit. Like you have to interact with the material world and change it, right? Kind of like the Marx quote, philosophers only interpret the world with points to change it. But yeah, it gets to that point. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Oh, and about like, if you wanna email us, laborcommission@cposa.org. We meet on the third Thursday of every month at 8 p.m. I think you gotta be in the party or be invited to join that, but that doesn't mean you can't hit me up. You can get my number, my email, friendly. I'll talk to you about unions, if you wanna join a union, how to participate in the trade union movement, resources, or if you're interested in writing about like, let's say that in DC, there's a picket or a strike or something. The People's World, we can help you get the skills to like do journalism, write about the strikes, interview people, take photos. So yeah, thank you for coming. I'm happy to be here. DC is great. It's not like Detroit, but Detroit is the best, but it's probably the second best. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate y'all.
Awesome. Let's see what we're gonna go.
Thank you guys so much for coming. So this is the last Saturday school of our spring semester, I guess you'd call it. This is so it's graduation season, guys. Like you graduated.
Yeah.
Congrats. You graduated from the Saturday school because you're here on the last one in May. So we are going to start back up the Saturday school again in the fall. We're taking summer off. We're gonna go be outside. But we are going to also taking
summer off.
yeah, we're taking summer off, but we are also thinking about and like figuring out, we're gonna do some kind of more internal like study group style stuff on Zoom. So we're gonna transition to like